I never like to preach from the ambo. I actually much prefer to be down there. But today I'm going to, because I have some figures that I need to share with you that kind of give some meat to the gist of this homily. We heard in our first reading today that we should give some of our bread to the hungry. Isaiah picks up on this theme, and then our Lord, of course, picks up on this again in Matthew chapter 25. That wasn't the gospel that we heard today, however. The gospel that we heard was this very famous, "You are the light of the world, the salt of the earth." But in the church's wisdom, a little bit of liturgical catechesis here, in the church's wisdom, the first reading and the gospel always go together. Now, the second reading, if it relates in any way, it's only coincidentally. But the first reading and the gospel, they always go together. They always shed light on one another. And so what I want to do today is kind of talk about how these shed light on each other by looking at the problem of poverty, but looking at poverty from three different levels: on a global scale, on a national scale, and then those who are closest to you and to me. And so let's begin by looking at poverty on a global, worldwide scale, because I think it's important that we can kind of concretize this, that we can put ourselves in the proper perspective. Because our leaders very often, and this is not a political homily by any stretch of the imagination, but our leaders like to oftentimes pit us against ourselves and say, well, you got the rich and the poor, and the rich are always thrown out there like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and those people. But the reality is that on a global scale, on a worldwide scale, we are all wealthy just by being born, just by virtue of the fact that we were born in this country. So a few months ago, you may remember the story, the gospel passage of Dives and Lazarus. Lazarus and the rich man, traditionally known and named as Dives, came up, and I preached on this gospel. And the point that I was trying to get across was that you're the rich man, and so am I. We're all the rich man because we're born in this country. So let me give you a couple of figures to kind of put this in perspective. If your net worth is over $871,000, you are in the top 1% of wealthy people on earth. Now, that is not you earn $871,000 a year, because that's relatively few of us. This is your net worth. What is net worth? Just so we make sure we define our terms clearly. That means you add up everything you own. You add up, your home, if you live on a farm, your land, your livestock, your machinery, your car, your investments, your savings account, everything. Add it all up. Write that number on top. Then add up everything that you owe. So what do you owe for your college loans? What do you owe on your house, on your car, on your credit cards, everything? Add that up. Write that number on bottom. So if you take the top number, take the bottom number, subtract it. If that number, the difference comes out to be $871,000, your net worth is $871,000, you are in the top 1% of wealthy people on planet Earth. Okay, take this down just a little bit. If you have a net worth of $93,000, you are in the top 10% of wealthy people on earth. $93,000 puts you in the top 10% of wealthy people on earth. Just imagine what the value of a home is in the United States. If you own your own home, you are in the top 10% of wealthy people on earth. It's good to have this perspective, just to kind of give ourselves a reminder. 50% of the world's population live on less than $2.50 a day. That is approximately $900 a year. 50%, that would be roughly 3.5 billion people live on $2.50 a day. 10% of the world's population, 10% live on less than $1.90 a day. That comes out to be about $700 a year. 10%, so roughly 700 million people on earth, twice the population of the United States, live on less than $1.90 a day. So it just kind of gives us some perspective to put ourselves in the context of we're very blessed in this country. We're all very wealthy. So what do we do with it? Because what did Jesus say? And not my words, what are the words of our Lord? He said, those to whom much has been given, much will be expected in return. So that should kind of shock us a little bit to say, okay, what am I doing to alleviate poverty on a global scale. For most of us, we can't go to the missions. Now, maybe some can, okay? And if you can, that's great. But for most of us, what this bare bones brass tacks means is we're generous financially, that we give money to the missions. Now, to be sure, we have to do our due diligence, and I would never recommend giving to a charity that does not support the teachings of the church, particularly with respect to human life and human dignity. But there are good charities out there that are doing good work in the third world, in sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia particularly, who are doing good work to bring drinking water to people, to bring food to people, shelter, things that we just kind of take for granted that we all have in our own life. So it's good to find these charities and to be generous to them if you can't go yourself, which for most of us, we can't just hop in an airplane and fly across the world to a part of the world that's in need. Bring this down a scale. We're going to look at this in terms of the United States. Again, it's important to have the right perspective. And again, to look at things on a global scale, because the reality is that even among the poor in the United States, those who are homeless, most people in our country do not experience the level of poverty that you would experience, for instance, if you went to sub-Saharan Africa, if you went to Calcutta, India. Most people in our country, even the homeless, have access, if they know where to look, to a warm meal at a shelter, to drinking water, to some type of clothing. Now, that being said, we still have people in our country who are impoverished. So these statistics are accurate as of 2019 from the U.S. Census Bureau. 11.8% of Americans live in poverty. That comes out to be about 38 million of our brothers and sisters around the country. Again, that's 11.8, so call it 12% of the population. What is the poverty line? What is the definition? Again, not my definition. This is the definition of the U.S. Census Bureau. A family of four making $26,000 to $26,200 or less a year. Family of four, $26,200 or less a year, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, that is the level of poverty. Now, the good news, so I'm giving you some of the bad news. There is good news here. In 1990, 36% of Americans lived below the poverty line. We have dropped that down to 11.8%. So it's trending, that line, if you look at a line graph, over the last 30 years has trended in the right direction. Conversely, the threshold of what constitutes poverty, that line is going up. So that also is going in the right direction. So we're making good progress. But nevertheless, we still have brothers and sisters who are in need. So what do? Once again, we go to that line. Those to whom much has been given, much will be expected in return. What do? We can certainly, again, be generous financially with our money. But also in this case, because we're a little closer to home, we can go to some of these places. We can volunteer our time helping at a soup kitchen, helping at a homeless shelter, something along those lines. In particular, we can bring our children so that our children experience this and our children see that there are other people in the world who maybe are not as blessed, who don't have the gifts and the blessings that they have. And in a particular way, there are children experiencing poverty. And to be aware of young people, who are living on the streets, who have this level of need. Global scale, national scale, people closest to you. Again, it's important to keep things in perspective, to keep that in mind. Because my bet is, living in middle America, in rural, middle-class America, most of us don't know too many people that are experiencing like what I would call just abject poverty. Do we have people in need in our life? Absolutely. But what I'm going to suggest to you is this. Most of the people that we encounter on a day-to-day basis have not a material poverty, but a spiritual poverty. So what does Jesus say? You are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. When I was hungry, you gave me to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me to drink. When I was sick, you visited me. This is what we'll be judged on. Matthew chapter 25 is clear on that. This is what we'll be judged on. It doesn't say, I paid my taxes and I let Uncle Sam do it. Paying your taxes is good. Uncle Sam, the government has a role in this. But the primary onus is on you and on me. We have to be aware of that. That's what it means to be a disciple. And so how do we do this? How do we love these people that are right next to us? Mother Teresa, in my humble estimation, the greatest example of Christian charity that we have had probably since our Lord himself. What did Mother Teresa do? Mother Teresa literally went into the streets, into the gutter of Calcutta, India, literally, and pulled dying people out of the gutter who were, soaked in their own human waste, and nursed them, brought them to her convent, nursed them, sometimes only for an hour or so before they would die. And why did she do this? She saw the face of Jesus in that person. She saw Christ in that person. Every single person that she encountered, she saw the face of Jesus. And so when we talk about someone close to us, someone that we see right next to us, we have to see the face of Jesus in that person. Because every single person that we encounter is made in the image of God. And so what did Mother Teresa say? Again, in my view, in my mind, the greatest example of a Christian witness of charity that we certainly have seen in our lifetime. Mother Teresa said, love the person next to you. Love the person next to you. Start there. For most of you, for most of us, that's your husband, your wife, your children, your parents. Love the person next to you. Because again, while we don't have maybe the level of material poverty that you would find in Honduras, in Calcutta, India, in Ethiopia, somewhere like that, we have a deep spiritual poverty. Look at this thing. Okay, I'm holding up my phone here for those of you that may not be able to see. Look at this thing. This thing gives us the ability to be the most connected society in human history. But ironically, we are now the most disconnected that we have ever been. Because what this thing does is it prevents us from talking to each other. How many people do you know in your life, and I know some, that are lonely, that have no friends? I can't tell you how many elderly people I have encountered in nursing homes whose children don't come to visit them. Maybe that's because they just have a hard time seeing mom and dad in a nursing home. Understandable. But what's going on is mom and dad are now lonely. They miss their kids, their grandkids. There's elderly people in nursing homes that don't have any kids, that don't have any grandkids. For you young people, we've got a youth mass today with a lot of young people, which is wonderful. I guarantee you in your school, there is somebody without a friend. I guarantee you in your school, there is someone who feels all alone. It's interesting. When as I was researching this, I was looking at a lot of different statistics. Honduras is the second most impoverished country in the Western Hemisphere after Haiti. Honduras has a suicide rate 4 times lower than that of the United States. Isn't that interesting? We who have basically everything that we need and a lot of what we want materially. We have a suicide rate 4 times higher than a country populated by people who live on $2 a day. What is it that they have that we don't have? I'm going to suggest to you it's community. It's the interaction of other people, of leaning on other people, of realizing that they're all in this together, that we're all brothers and sisters. Would that we might have that same gift. I'm going to end this homily today with a little story. This is a true story in my own life, and this is not endearing, okay? I am not proud of this. But it speaks to this point. Excuse me. When I was thinking about entering seminary, before I considered studying for the priesthood, I was working in a meatpacking plant in Storm Lake. I'm from Storm Lake, and this was hard work. But I took 6 months to save some money, pay off some college bills, and prepare to enter seminary and study for the priesthood. As I was working, there was a man, and I won't give his real name, we'll just call him Wilbur. Wilbur worked with me, and Wilbur was incessantly bullied by other coworkers. I have never in my life seen someone subjected to the type of bullying that this man was. He was elderly. He was old enough to be my grandfather. Pretty inconspicuous individual, not going to have any books written about him in life, but a man who worked hard every day, showed up, did what he was supposed to do, didn't complain. His coworkers would throw things at him. They would ridicule him. They would mock him. They would crash forklifts into his forklift intentionally to bother him. I've never seen a person picked on like this anywhere. And I stood there and watched it. I didn't participate, but I didn't do anything. I wasn't a friend to this man. On one occasion, I actually sat down and ate lunch with him. It's one of the best lunches I've ever had. He was one of the kindest men I've ever met. But you could see the pain in his eyes of this incessant bullying. It's my sincere hope that you don't know anyone in your life who's subjected to that level of ridicule, because no one should have to go through what I saw this man go through. But I'll bet you that you have a Wilbur in your life. Someone who the world has kind of forgotten. Someone who everybody else looks down on. What does Mother Teresa say? Love the person next to you. Find the Wilbur in your life, and don't be like your priest. Don't be like the guy that I was, that just sat there because I didn't want to rock the boat. Didn't want to call out my coworkers and say, hey, you guys are better than this, knock it off. I was a wimp, if I'm real honest. But I'll bet you have a Wilbur in your life. Be a friend to that man or that woman. Love the person next to you.